So let's get into some of the on-court stuff. We're going to have games again this week, which is going to be fun. Wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the regression that we've seen. And one of the things that people like to talk about is how Brad Stevens' teams comes back from the break often playing a lot better. I think two people that everybody really wants to see kind of get a little bit of a step up are Jaylen-Brown and Jayson-Tatum. That's been one of the bigger stories, I think. Jaylen has had a better February. He had a really bad January where he shot 27.8% from three, but he looked a lot better in February, which is a small sample size, but he's back up near 40%. In the last couple of weeks, what have you seen from him and what's kind of stood out?
I think he's been a little more inconsistent than he probably was earlier in the season. I think he's shown some great games, and he's done some great things, and then some nights it's just not there.
Yeah.
And I think the slippage from the Celtics has mostly been the offense.
Right.
Like their defense the last couple of games stunk, but before that, the defense was still the #1 ranked defense.
Yeah.
It's still giving them a chance most games. It's the offense that has let them down repeatedly. And you look at Jaylen-Brown, and he's just not quite impacting games the way he did earlier in the season. And it's probably partly because the long season.
Yeah.
And this is really his first season. Like he played last year. He wasn't a huge part.
Yep.
He was just a role player. This is his first time being in a featured role. He's guarding the opposing best player almost all the time.
Yep.
He's asked to do so much defensively. He's asked to be one of the top scorers on the team. He's looked to produce in a different way than he ever did last season. Last season it was just, Jaylen, give us a couple spot minutes, like give us energy and don't screw up the plays, and you'll be good. And this year it's like, Jaylen, you're one of our key guys. We need more from you. And so I think those two guys, Jaylen and Jayson, are kind of playing more like people expected them to earlier in the season, which is, they show some flashes of greatness. They have moments where it's not all there, some frustrating moments. And I think both those guys have gone through it at the same time, which is tough for the Celtics and has kind of hurt them. And I think also it's just the whole offense is out of whack.
Yeah.
So there's no rhythm to anybody's game right now. It's up and down the roster. It's just they don't have it collectively as a team. They've been 28th ranked offense since January 1st, which is now like 20 games. That's a quarter of the full season. That's a legit sample size. Yeah, that's troubling.
It definitely is. It definitely is. I think one of the things that's impressed me about Jaylen is sort of he looks more in control to me, like almost most of the time now, which I think is really important, just because he does have all that athleticism, and if he can really start to control it, I think he's got the beginnings of a nice handle, even though he turns the ball over constantly. Like you can see what he's trying to do most of the time, and I think that's usually pretty encouraging. And obviously, if he can get around the rim and if he can start finishing those a little bit better, he's actually down this season a little bit around the rim from 58 to 56%. But I do think that you can see, again, sort of the thought process, like what he's trying to do. And I think it makes more sense a lot of the time this year. I think what he's trying to do isn't necessarily as out of control as it might have been last year.
And there are games he just puts his physical imprint on everything. Like the Washington game. Yeah. I don't think he was tactically great. Like he screwed up in transition a few times. He was a little out of control sometimes, but he was such a physical presence that he changed everything in that game. He got out on the break. Yep. He went around his back. He slammed on people's heads. Like he basically got the Celtics a lead in that game, not by himself, but he was just such a force. And I think you see every once in a while that Jaylen realizes, like, wow, I'm really a freak compared to even all these other guys.
I'm more athletic than all these athletic guys.
I can get where I want, and I can do what I want. And when he has those moments, it's really like, wow, that kid has a whole lot of potential, a ceiling that is super, super high, but they just haven't come grouped together a lot lately. Right.
And I think we are seeing him group it together a little more consistently than we're seeing Tatum, which makes sense because he's had, even though he had like the one season where he didn't play as much, he still has that season. He still has that season around the Celtics. Talk about Tatum a little bit. The slide has been pretty consistent, actually, from which it was going to always be. He was never going to be a 50% three-point shooter.
Yeah, nobody is.
Right, exactly. It turns out he's not the greatest three-point shooter in the history of the NBA. But he has slid. He was 50, looking at the months of the season so far, 50%, 48%, 45%, 34%, and now 31%. And I think that slide down, especially given what the pre-draft sort of numbers and all the measurements and all that. Given that what he shot at Duke and what his skill set was supposed to be, I feel like that regression is a little concerning.
I don't know how concerning it is. He's shown he can knock down shots. I think the regression was always going to, like you said, he wasn't going to be 51% forever. I think it did coincide, the drop did coincide with when he hurt his finger. So part of it is probably can be attributed to that. I think there's also the point with Jayson-Tatum, he's never been a shooter before.
Yeah.
He's not like this guy who's been a marksman his whole life, who's built up this confidence from years and years of making shots.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if it rattled him to miss shots for the first time all season. Like, when you're shooting 51%, nothing's going to rattle you. You're just going to keep shooting 51%. But then you miss it a little bit.
Yeah.
And you've never been a shooter your whole life. So I wonder if the mentality that he is a shooter and that he is so improved from that range, I wonder if he doubts that sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's one of the things I wonder with him. And if you look at the true shooting percentage, he was in the 60s, I think, the first 3 months. He's been sub 50 the last 2 months.
Yeah.
You see him go to the hoop, and he's like lost the ball out of bounds a lot of the time. You can tell that he needs more strength.
Yeah.
And the rookie wall is something I don't even know if it exists. I've never seen a study to prove that the rookie wall exists.
Which you and Matt Moore keep arguing about.
Yes, we like to argue about that on Twitter. And it's not even that I don't believe in it, it's just I've never seen numbers that prove it.
Yeah.
But it certainly seems like he has not been the same player. He has not had the same energy. I think he's averaged fewer than 3 rebounds per game in the month of February, which is troubling because even when he wasn't shooting well, even the games where he didn't produce in that sense, he always rebounded. That's something he's always done, dating back to high school, dating back to probably when he was born. And he hasn't always done that lately. So Tatum has hit a lull, and he's more inconsistent. He's probably what he should have been this year.
Sure.
Like, he was out of this world for 3 months. He was totally outrageous. It was not realistic what he was doing for a long time. He was playing like one of the greatest rookies of all time at 19 years old. So lately he's kind of played like a 19-year-old, and it's almost shocking because of how good he was earlier, but at the same time, he's 19.
Yeah.
And he's going through some things right now, and he and Jaylen-Brown both have to pull through it because the Celtics really, really need those guys. They don't have enough perimeter scoring. They don't have enough shooting. They don't have enough athleticism outside of those guys to kind of get away with it when those guys aren't good.
Definitely. And I think one thing that people can take a little bit of, comfort in is that I think it does seem like Brad Stevens really believes in his shooting. I don't think that's just Stevens, being nice to the rookie and sort of like, trying to build him up. I think that it seems like the organization and Stevens and everybody around there, they had that legendary workout that they always talk about where he came in and hit
81 out of 100.
10,000 3-pointers in a row. So that does seem to be the case.